Hey guys, welcome back to Time Under Tension. This is episode 12, and today we will be talking about intuition. I think intuition can seem like a vague concept at times, and in a world that is often really driven by and inspired by science and hard data, something like intuition can sound a little out there. And so I wanted to kind of break that down today and talk about uh, differences in perspective and how we see intuition, how you can connect with your intuition, things that might be blocking it, and just some tangible practices to begin to build trust with yourself as you listen to that internal voice that can really help you drive your life towards your passions.
Ooh, yeah, you just hit trigger words for me. Drive towards your passions. Um,
Really, I think that's like w- such a valuable goal, like to actually live in a passionate state, although we can't necessarily feel like the height of passion all the time. Like if you can be passionate about each aspect of your life, that's when I think we get into that flow where work feels like play and helping others feels like spreading our light. It all just becomes like part of this natural flow of expression.
yeah, I think you're setting me up perfectly for my definition of intuition or how I see it to be helpful in pursuing purpose. So, um, I more when you said that, I was like, that is very much how I see intuition, and I think our passions are a part of our intuition, to be honest. I think our emotions, the things that we feel, are ways of being alerted that we need to pay attention to something. And passion is definitely one of those main emotions that come up that really overtake our entire body, and we're able to enter that flow state. And so for me, when I think about my intuition, one of the things that I'm focusing on now, just as I enter into a little bit more life coaching, is that I want to help other people really be able to live their purpose, live out that passion. And one of the things that I start with initially is their identity. Where are they giving away their power in these things that they're identifying with? What boxes are they in? Because I think that is tied completely with their intuition. If you are placing your identity in all of these other boxes, you're not taking the time to connect with yourself at all. All you're doing is trying to outsource your who you are into all of these things you think will make you acceptable, or you won't be abandoned if you fit into a box, and you'll be able to connect instead of being aware of your uniquely divine self, um, and knowing that that connectedness to your intuition, to that voice that's within that doesn't sound the same as your mind. It's this thing that you feel. It's this teller that you just know that something feels right, right? That's what we say. I just kind of know that this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And that, to me, is your intuition. And when you start to connect your intuition to your identity, this part of you that's connecting you to all things, connecting you to all people, connecting you to your emotions and your feelings, your passions, then all of a sudden you get to live out your purpose, which is what you just said, that space where your work becomes your play and you know your why. And when you're completely full of energy all the time because you're serving all of these other people in that area. It shows that balance between knowing that you're divine and knowing that you're a speck in the world. It's having that confident humility, but knowing that all of the decisions you're making are going to be made in the uncertain future. So if you're not connected to that inner voice, that intuition inside, then your decision making becomes unknown, and you're again outsourcing all of the power that you have within to all of these other boxes you're trying to fit in.
So I think in thinking about connecting to intuition and its value, I think that we almost need the presupposition that one, like we're unique, two, we have power, and three, we have everything we need to execute our purpose inside of us. And those can be really hard things to accept. But I think that if you establish that as the premise, then you can really move forward in a discussion about intuition and really diving into it. And I would challenge you guys, if you feel resistant to that idea of intuition because it doesn't feel tangible or it feels a little too self-dependent and not like data driven. I'm super data driven. So sometimes it can feel like not the most like accurate way by which to guide your life. But I've started to accept those premises lately, that I have everything that I need within me if I only pay attention to the voice inside. And I would challenge you just to try to live like that and see how you feel, like just as a trial period, and use that as an opportunity to connect with your inner voice and see how often it leads you into that flow state of passion. And I think you'll see where it really can add a lot of value to your life.
Something that Simon Sinek said when I was listening to a podcast with him is that love, passion, joy, happiness, all of these things that we just accept aren't measurable are actually measurable. We just have to do the long race. We have to collect data over the long haul, not just, you're not just getting immediate feedback. You're not getting the quick data points. It's choosing to listen to the inner voice for a significant period of time. For him, I think he said in his podcast, he said something around like 2 months, 3 months ish. It depends on what it is that you're really trying to grasp. But what he was saying was they are measurable, and the way to measure them is to be consistent day to day, consistently doing this. As for us, we're talking about connecting to the intuition and listening to it, and then reflecting on how you felt, reflecting on what happened in your life when you did that. Did something positive happen when you listened to your intuition? Did something feel like flow? Did you feel like you were playing? Did you feel unsafe? Did you feel triggered? Like, just taking in all of this information as you go, but understanding that over a period of time, you'll be able to go back and look in those 3 months. Every single time I followed my intuition, this is how life responded to me, or this is the thing that ended up happening in my career, or my job, or my relationships with people. And you're able to actually then sift out true data to show that following your intuition, for him, he said in this, following your intuition did lead to this life of fullness, of love, of passion, of joy, exceedingly more than what life was like when you were having massive decision fatigue, because you were like, well, should I do this or should I do that? And I'm just going to look it up, or I'm going to ask someone else, or I'm going to not just get in touch with self and follow what it is that you feel inside that you know is the right decision.
That is great. So one of the definitions I found when I was looking into like what is intuition, like how do we like quantify it or define it? One of the notes kind of said like instinct is our innate inclination towards a particular behavior as opposed to a learned response. But I think what you said makes a lot of sense. Like it's not removing the learned response. You are learning. You have to just commit to it first and then learn by being objective. Like commit to something that feels right within you, pursue it actively and consistently, and then step back and evaluate your response. Do you feel more fulfilled? Do you feel like you're in alignment with your purpose? Are you getting into that flow state? Are you feeling more passionate about the way that you're living? So it is learned in a lot of ways. My favorite definition that I found said, intuition is a process that gives us the ability to know something directly without analytical reasoning, bridging the gap between conscious and non-conscious parts of our mind, and also between instinct and reason. And I think that is how I see intuition is, like you said, it bridges that gap between instinct and reason. So you have this internal feeling, like a gut feeling about something that drives you or fulfills you or lights you up or whatever it is, or a particular decision you feel like you need to make, even if you can't really, work out why you are leaning one way or another. But it does bridge between that instinct and reason, because underlying our instinct as we grow older are these lessons that we've learned over time. We just might not be consciously aware of them. Like, we're always acting out of the things we've learned in our lives. So you're never going to be just intuitive or just analytical. Like, you are a beautiful and perfect combination of both things. And instinct or intuition is really allowing you to tap into both of those sources of power.
Do you want to give a little bit further your personal definition of intuition?
I mean, so I don't think I really defined it before I started looking this up, but as a feeling, it's like uh, an inclination towards a particular decision. Like, I feel like, all right, let me give an example. I had been feeling like I needed to step away from bodybuilding. Now, analytical me just wants to write a pros and cons list, ask everyone and their mom their opinion about it, and decide whether or not it makes sense to do this. And the thing is, I kept running into, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense at all. There's no pros, there's only cons. But I could not shake the feeling that I knew what I needed to do. And that's where I felt like this dissonance between my intuition and my over dependence on analytical reasoning. So for me, intuition is stepping back and being able to actually be objective, because I'm being open to both what my body is telling me and the external data that I'm getting, even if I'm not consciously processing the pros and cons. Like, I think our spirit knows that there's something good in it for us if we take the step. Like, for me, I believe we often know what God is calling us to do, even if we don't know why. We don't know how it's going to work out. We don't see the end point. And half the time that we think we see the end point, we are totally guessing and in the dark regardless. But it's like, but I still feel like I should do this. And I can't really explain it to anyone. And my pros and cons list is completely contrary to this. And, you know, I think, going back to the previous point, not being able to explain it to anyone is what makes it really challenging for me, because I do want that external affirmation that what I'm doing like makes sense, that someone has walked the path before and can attest to it being successful. But intuition is often not in alignment with that. Like, it is often the path less traveled, but it requires an intense trust in self and belief for me in like divine intervention in my life, and like the Holy Spirit speaking into my life and what I should or should not be doing.
Yeah, I want to work off that because I think what you're saying is so good. I think there is the even further like back, even if someone has like massive disconnect between mind and body, doesn't even acknowledge their body, I feel like that is where I was at. I was at this point where I was letting my mind decide everything for me. It's like I had no neck. That's what I tell people. It's like I literally had no neck. I was just this from here up making all of my decisions because I just completely numbed out any relationship to my body. And I think it's important to talk about the intuition being in the body. Your intuition is in your body. It's in this part of you, in this general area. It's not in here. That's why I think that definition is so great, because it's not analytical reasoning 100%. It's not your mind. Your mind is the thing that gets impacted most by the trauma, your life experiences that don't go well, all of these learned behaviors we're talking about. Our mind gets the biggest impact. All we're doing is trying to make sense of everything that's happened to us before, but really our body is the thing that should be driving our decision making. It just needs to make sense to us. It doesn't need to make sense based on all of these things that have gotten in our minds. And something that your guy Jay Shetty says is there's a difference between your mind and your intelligence. There are two parts in your mind, in your head and your conscious unconscious awareness. There's the mind, which is like your child, like, or I guess is more like a child. It acts like a child. It needs that instant gratification. It needs things to make sense right away. It needs that validation from other people. It's going to be the thing that's keeping you stuck, that fear. But your intelligence is the thing that's connected to your intuition, which is really that greater sense of knowing that if you allow that to drive your behavior, a lot of what you're doing, like you're saying, isn't going to make any sense to other people until it's in hindsight. That's how it always works. Vision's 2020 in hindsight. So I just think what you're saying is so great, but knowing that it really does take that initial work of connecting mind and body, that has to be the first thing that you do. Because I could say back in the day, I was, I was making decisions from my intuition just because I was reacting to everything. All my decisions were based on all of these fears I was feeling. I just wasn't aware. That awareness of how you truly feel requires, for me, stillness. That's how I start to connect to my intuition, is I need to get still. I need to be quieting that child, my mind, and let my intelligence connect to my intuition. And really, I feel like my answers come from there. And one of the things that I feel like I've had to do 100% is surrender to having any kind of knowing all the details, or knowing how it's going to happen. It's like whatever it is that I feel I'm being told in my, I call it my soul chamber, but in this area for me, I'm going to do what I can in the now, just day by day, to work towards that, trusting that the source, God, the universe is going to be working in my favor. That Einstein quote we always hear. It's like you have a choice to decide if the universe is working for you or against you. And I just think it's important to go even further back to the very, very beginning of truly being able to access that intuition. Because if you don't have a true connectedness to self in your body, that mind body connection, then really you're not able to actually receive any of that information.
I want to jump back for a minute because you talked about the mind being more childlike. And I want to differentiate between the immaturity of being childlike and the goal, I think, of being more childlike, because I think that intuition is something that we're more connected to as children. And then there are things that happen in our lives and people who tell us, things are supposed to be this way, like, don't act like that. You're not just making decisions based on what you feel is right. Sometimes you're doing a lot of things as you get older that aren't really in alignment with what you want. And I think that that's a normal process. I think we need to learn how to integrate into society properly. We can't just constantly do what we want at the expense of other people, at the expense of, being a contributing member of society, and like all the things that are required of maturity. But I think that's where we find the balance is when a kid makes a mistake. Assuming it wasn't corporal punishment, a lot of us were put in timeout. And really what timeout should be is not like this forced isolation. It should be a time to be reflective. Like that's, I want you to sit there and think about what you did. And really that's what it's about. And I think that as we get older, instead of doing that, that's what we should do, is when we make a decision that leads to an outcome that wasn't desirable, we should take a time out and stop and reflect on what we did and what led us to that point. We instead just say, well, what I thought I was supposed to be doing, like, I can't listen to that at all. So I'm going to outsource this by getting the opinions of other people or using my reasoning, or just taking in as much external information as possible while I'm simultaneously trying to keep up with the pace of the world, which does not really encourage time for timeouts. But I think in order to come back to that childlike wisdom, not the childish behavior, but childlike wisdom is trusting that you have maturity at this point in your life, that you know everything you need to know to make appropriate decisions in your life and to learn from decisions that don't lead where you want to go if you are taking timeouts. So for me, like, I think meditating was a really helpful process at the beginning of this journey. And while it's something that admittedly I don't keep up with very well, journaling has been invaluable, as a way to stop and reflect and think about, okay, the way that I'm living, not only the choices that I'm making, but the mindset that I'm inhabiting as I approach daily life and make decisions. How is it? What's the outcome? How am I feeling? Do I feel fulfilled? Am I living a life of passion? And that gives me a good indicator as to whether or not I'm living in alignment with my intuition.
Yeah, so good. It's like those, it's exactly what I was saying about those emotions being like flags to get your attention. I think that's so great. Something that I kind of want to build off of that is you're talking about childish versus childlike and knowing everything that you need to know. You already know everything you need to know. And I think that is so true. And I actually listened to a meditation right before this that I feel like connects all the way back to intuition. And it was a scripture based Roman scripture around the goodness that we all have within us. But it connected goodness to being able to instruct others based on what you've been through already. And so, how that ties to intuition in my mind is exactly what you said, that we already know everything we need to know. Because everything that you're talking about in terms of maturing, we're getting further, we happen to get most of the time further and further away from that childlike state where we feel super powerful. We make our decisions, we're can actually have an imagination, like very, very heightened imagination. We're look down at a cement ground and we're like, this is, we're walking on this blocks of gold as we jump around in this fairy tale land. And it's like so real that I think the goal is to return home. The goal is to return back to that. But as we mature and as we are learning all of these things, as we're getting taught by our surroundings, our parents, our friends at school, our teachers, our environment is creating all of these experiences for us along the way that take us out of being that childlike state that we're talking about getting back to. It takes us further and further away from being in touch with our intuition because now we're just overthinking everything. We become adults. And when we're adults, like you said before, it's nice to have kids around because you get to play again. You get to be back in that space where you kind of get to remember what it was like before you had to overthink everything now that you're an adult. It's like all of those experiences that you go through, as long as we're taking time outs, like you're saying, we get to really learn what worked and what didn't work and what's not serving us and what's leading to all of these feelings of pain and depression, anxiety. It's things that are bringing our light dimmer and dimmer and allowing us to function more and more from our mind, overthinking instead of allowing our bodies and our intuitions, trusting that, like you're talking about. The thing that I feel like brings us back though is when we realize that all of our experiences were teaching us something extremely specific to our purpose. Our experiences are all unique. Your experiences, even though they're similar to mine in terms of eating and in that area, are massively different based on who it was that was teaching us something, or we saw something, or what we latched to as a behavior. It's different, but that in itself allowed us to connect. But we also then get to outsource our experiences based on what we learned, based on now what we know in our bodies and in our intuition, to then go out and serve other people, live out our purpose. You're a online coach who does meal plans and workouts essentially, but really what you do is you connect to other people and you change their lives. You are there for them, they feel heard and seen, and all of these things. That is truly the fruitfulness and the goodness that comes from that. You use all of your skills, you use the fact that you have been in fitness in all of these different realms for so long that you have just this knowing of, based on all your experiences, on how to then move forward with clients that you have. And I just think that speaks so highly to our intuition really does know everything we need to know right now, because this is all that we know is right now. We can't expect to have all of this knowing about the future. It's uncertain. Literally nobody knows what's going to happen. So truly knowing everything that you need to know is all based on the life that you've lived up until this point. That trusting what you know on the inside is going to be the thing that leads you to that fullness, that connectedness, that shared humanity that literally brings that feeling of purpose and fullness.
So, what would you recommend for someone who is super unfamiliar with what it means to connect with their intuition? Like an actual game plan, like tangible walk away today and can start this process.
For me, what's worked for me is really allowing myself to be open, not only to what someone is saying to me, but what I'm feeling, not being in my feelings, but being with them. I was super reactive. For me, it was like my responses were all just immediate based on what I thought. And I would just literally not ever take time to get still and be calm. That when I started to truly listen to somebody else, truly listen to my feelings on the inside, just start listening, start hearing and observing. Then the next thing that I did was I did start meditating. I downloaded Insight Timer. They have so many different meditations that are specific to depression, anxiety, mindfulness, literally anything you could possibly think of. And all I did was start slow. I started meditating 5 minutes a day. I really didn't give myself any kind of, shame or guilt or negative self-talk in that experience. I just allowed myself to be and just kept doing it. I knew that I just wanted to connect to my body, and laying down on the concrete and letting myself completely be still ended up leading to me being able to meditate for 20-30 minutes and really being able to understand my body a lot more.
Good. For me,
What
more of a journaler. One thing I like to do is I like to, at the end of the day, go back and reflect on the moments in my day that in which I felt anxiety or some kind of like negative feeling, but being like super objective about that. Like, this is when I felt really tired, or this is when I felt anxious. I think it's important to note those things because that's, like you said, a flag to maybe something or an area in which you're not in alignment, but then also reflect on the areas or moments of your day that made you feel full, and really end the reflection with that, of like focusing more on what made you feel full. I think it's important to reflect on the moments that do cause some dissonance, because that can give you an indicator of areas that you might need to implement more of those pieces that make you feel full or make a change in that area. But I think ending, really, your life is going to be more about what you focus on. And we know that what we focus on, especially at the end of the day, and kind of sleep on, really perpetuates into the next day. So spending the end of the day being grateful and really reflecting on the highlights, I think can be super helpful.
Great. I think maybe we should talk about how intuitive eating, next video could maybe be on intuitive eating. I think when you do that mind body connection and we're talking about intuition, to me that connects fully with intuitive eating and being exposed to, where intuition can show up in other kinds of active pursuits in terms of healing.
I think your mention of the mind and body disconnection um, really is a great point. And I think that a lot of people experience that, where they aren't in tune with that gut feeling, because they really are so disconnected from their bodies. And I think that there's a lot of ways we can use external things, not things outside of us completely, but things that we can do with our bodies to start to tap into and ingrain what that intuition looks like, but in a more tangible arena. So I think that would be a great topic for next week. And we can kind of talk about some ways that you could, some strategies that you could implement in your life to start connecting to your intuition and practicing within like a safe arena.
Yeah, that's great. My mind's like, "Oop, I have all these ideas."
Awesome. So that will be the plan next week. Thank you guys
Yeah.
for watching. Please like, subscribe, comment below. Let us know if there's anything that you would like to see, and we'd be happy to go over it. I'm going to challenge you this week to really just give yourself trust, even if you feel like you don't deserve it. Give yourself trust and just live out of it and make decisions and learn from them, and give yourself the grace to learn, which means the grace to make mistakes. And you'll begin to build that trust with your intuition, and try implementing at least one of the strategies of like meditating or journaling, or even like hypnosis or breathing can be really helpful as well. So just 5 minutes, like Dee said, is like, don't overcommit to 30 minutes a day. Just tell yourself 5 minutes and see where it takes you.
I think one more thing, that I just wanna share is that, just to add to that, is you will make mistakes thinking it's your intuition. You will absolutely think you're tapping into your intuition, and it won't be, and that in itself is another win, because you'll really be able to decipher between, is this my intuition talking, or is this my fear talking, or is this a learned something somebody else told me that I think is true? All of it is going to be working towards you actually truly discovering your intuition. So don't get frustrated, like you're saying, if you make a decision and thought it was your intuition and all of a sudden you realize it wasn't. That's great. That's just another one of those data points we were talking about in terms of the long race, the long haul, where you'll be able to really be able to understand and hear clearly your intuition later on.
When we look at relationships with other people, we naturally understand that you have to get to know someone. And yet I don't think we often treat ourselves that way. But when you don't spend much time with yourself, you got to give yourself the chance to get to know yourself again, which is a process. And I think that's a good way to go about it. Awesome. Well, thank you guys for watching. Stay tuned for next week's episode, a little bit of a follow-up of tangible application points from this video, and we'll see you next week.